right? Is it all about the rallies? Would he rather have a lot of cheering at the rallies and move beyond the 42, 43, 44%? And is that why he keeps making these inflammatory remarks, these racist remarks that, again, get bigots stirred up at his rallies, but keeps him below the threshold he needs to get to win in 2020?
The president views it this way, that in 2015, 2016, during that campaign, he focused on what has now become his base. The certain people who identify with his anger, with his grievances, with his hardline policy on immigration. Yes, sometimes the racist comments.
By the way, Jonathan, can I correct you? It's not his anger. He's a poser. This is all posing. I mean, I just wanted to throw that in. You don't have to agree with me, but his alleged anger, he's playing this populist role. And he's playing his supporters as suckers. But anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Joe, it's your show. What they see as his anger, how they interpret it. And he said that was a pretty narrow view of the electorate last time around, and he won anyway. So his sense, and the people around him are, we're going to stay with that. There has been no effort to grow his base. He does love the rallies. He tells people all the time that is his favorite thing as president, is to go to a hall, whether it's in North Carolina or Virginia or Wisconsin, or whatever it may be, and get up there and perform. He feels like that energy. He feels like it's an energy, it's enthusiasm. He believes that he has people who come to those rallies who aren't being picked up in the polls. And to be fair, he was somewhat right last time around. And he thinks that he can do that again this time. Now, his political strategists think that they want him to tone down some of these controversies. They want him to focus on the economy, which remains his best argument. They want him to go to these handful of battleground states that are going to decide this election. He spent Friday in Wisconsin. I was along for that trip. And he did. That day, he stayed on message, pushing about trade and tariffs and the economy. That's what they want him to see and stick with. But he seems incapable of doing that. And just in the last few days, think of the controversies he's had to deal with. The resignation of Secretary Acosta in the wake of the Jeffrey Epstein scandal on Friday. His stinging defeat with the census decision also on Friday. And of course, most damning, the racist tweet from yesterday, which was meant to try to further a divide among Democrats, one that he had somewhat effectively played to a few days earlier between Speaker Pelosi and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her cohorts. Except, of course, this time he went entirely too far and has said, given a gift to Democrats who will certainly reunite in their condemnation of what he said.
So, Miko, again, we talk about signal and the noise. I know we need to talk about this because this is just pure out
bigotry. We can cover it all, including Jeffrey Epstein.
We can talk about that. But let's also, again, before we talk about these tweets, let's talk about why he did it. Well, he
D-squared.
He told his people that he was going to fight to get his question on the census. Then the Supreme Court said no. Then he told his people he was going to hold a press conference, and he was going to actually put it on there and defy the Supreme Court. Then he weakly and meekly backed down, like, as he might say, like a little baby. He backed down. That was one thing he did. Also, he had to fire Acosta. Why? Because Donald Trump knows that as long as Acosta's there, people are going to say that man called Jeffrey Epstein a terrific guy. That man invited 25, 26 calendar girls to Mar-a-Lago for a VIP reception. But it was that man and Jeffrey Epstein alone at that Mar-a-Lago, quote, party where those two old men had 26 young calendar girls swirling around them. He doesn't want us to talk about that. He wants our hair to be on fire about the census. What else does he not want us to talk about? Well, you know, Jonathan mentioned it. I mean, this has been a very rough weekend for him. These ICE raids that were supposed to materialize, they never materialized. We're getting reports that the numbers were far below even what Barack Obama did. So this has been a disastrous political weekend for Donald Trump, where he's looked weak and meek, and in Donald Trump's words, like a little baby. And so what does he do? He says, I'm going to fire off some tweets on Sunday
Right.
And the press is going to follow him around, and that's all they're going to talk about him money. Now, we're going to talk about him right now.
Oh, we will.
We're gonna
In
talk
just
about
one
him right
second,
now.
though, because I have a point to make.
Yeah.
The point you made, you talk about that man and the party he had with Epstein and that man. Let me just tell you, there's also the math that America is doing when he says Donald Trump hiring someone who a lot of people seemed as completely inappropriate as his labor secretary. Interesting, because you just wonder what kind of he was doing for Alex Acosta. Like, what kind of connection did they have that he thought he needed to hire him as labor secretary? And if you watched on Friday, he and Alex Acosta walking out onto the White House lawn around the press and saying this was his idea for him to quit. Very nervous around Alex Acosta. I just don't understand the connection there, which is why we'll cover all these stories and we'll continue to.
If you back out to 30,000 feet, he hired, as the guy, Secretary of Labor, he hired a guy who lied to young girls who had been raped.
Very nervous next to him.
And lied to about young girls who had been raped, about that he would stay in touch with them, but he made a plea deal that made justice impossible for them to get.
What's going on there?
And he's standing next to a man who was running buddies with Jeffrey Epstein for quite some time. So, yes, I suspect Donald Trump has a reason to be nervous, has a reason to set out incendiary tweets on Sunday morning, so we're not talking about what happened Friday afternoon.
Exactly. So in the category of distracting, deflecting, and dividing, in a series of tweets yesterday, President Trump said that a group of progressive congresswomen critical of his immigration policies should go back to the countries they originally came from. He tweeted, "So interesting to see progressive Democrat congresswomen who originally came from countries whose governments are a complete and total catastrophe, the worst, most corrupt, inept, and anywhere in the world, if they even have a functioning government at all, now loudly and viciously telling the people of the United States, the greatest and most powerful nation on earth, how our government is to be run. Why don't they go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came? Then come back and show us how it is done. These places need your help badly. You can't leave fast enough. I'm sure that Nancy Pelosi would be very happy to quickly work out free travel arrangements." Although he didn't mention anyone by name, the four apparent targets of the president's tweets were Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, who was born in the Bronx to the parents of Puerto Rican descent.
Americans.
The president wouldn't know that. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, who was born in Detroit to Palestinian immigrants. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts, who is black and born in Cincinnati.
Well, Cincinnati,
and raised
I mean,
in Chicago.
that's almost Canada.
Right.
I mean, really.
And
You're from the deep
Congresswoman
South.
Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, who was born in Somalia, but moved to the United States when she was 12 and is a naturalized U.S. citizen.